All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Lecture 10. This is again week 4. So far, you should have already watched lectures 8 and 9. And as always, you have quiz 4 due right around the corner. So make sure you're keeping up with everything because the more you watch these videos, the better you're more likely to do, especially because there's going to be things that I'm going to be able to explain a little bit better than just by looking at the PowerPoint. So just bear with me on that. All right. So as always, my general reminders for this class, because I don't know about y'all, but I really do like the idea of continuing to stay in person as much as possible and not kicking all the grad students off of campus because I've already delayed my graduation by a year. So not that I don't love teaching y'all here at UCF, but I'd rather enjoy doing it at another university where I can actually have a PhD next to my name. So um, please, 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 please make sure that y'all are wearing your masks and social distancing. I know I've recently seen multiple groups of, undergraduate students primarily that were standing in groups of 10 to 11 people without their masks on or with their masks pulled down. Obviously, that's kind of counterintuitive, so please make sure you guys are paying attention to this and make sure y'all are following the rules. I don't know if y'all saw this, but Northwestern recently kicked a bunch of students out because didn't refund them their tuition or anything, which was like $42,000 a year, and they totally lost everything because they weren't following rules and they were clearly potentially endangering people on campus. So I don't think UCF will ever do that, and I honestly think that Northwestern's reaction was probably a little extreme, but let's not tempt fate here, especially with Labor Day, as crazy as it was. I know that we went places, my wife and I, and realized how quickly and busy they got, and we just left because we just didn't want to deal with it. And it's unfortunate that we have to live like this for a little bit, but hopefully we can keep it a short period of time and not have to continue to worry about it. So as somebody who studies disease spread, please, please, please make sure you're doing everything you can to stop it. All right. Now, I already kind of briefly mentioned this, but again, Quiz 4 is due at the end of the week on Sunday, September 20th, and it's due at 11:59 p.m. So in other words, basically midnight. So please make sure you're doing this. I've locked the correct answers until then, so that way you can't see them until that point. So if you're looking for the correct answers, that's where they are. And as always, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. We can set up office hours where you can sit and talk with me on Zoom and we can answer any of the questions you might have, whether that be, how did I become a scientist to, um, what kind of opportunities are there for you as a potential scientist to, hey, I'm just trying to get through this class. Can you please help me with this one thing? So I'm open for any of that kind of stuff. So please, if you have those kinds of questions or you just want some time to talk about those kinds of things, please let me know. I'd be happy to set up an office hours time where we can chat for like 20, 30 minutes individually and work through some of this stuff. Also, again, if it's just a quick, easy question, I'm more than happy just to answer emails because I think that that'll, quickly turn around stuff. Now, obviously, I'm a little bit slower when it comes to emails over the weekend just because I have a life too. But please, if you have any questions or concerns or whatever, reach out and let me know. I'm always happy to help. All right, so let's dig back into things here again. And we're back in Unit 2 where we're talking about systems and microbes. And today is going to be kind of the opening up into the rest of the unit. So where the plant stuff we only briefly covered, and I'll probably ask maybe a couple questions about it on the exam. And the microbe stuff has got a lot of important things in it, but again, it's kind of a one-off. This is where things are going to start building on top of themselves. And we're going to be talking about today, chapter 23, which is animal tissues and organ systems, which is going to kind of give a general overview of how these things are structured. And then we'll actually dig into specific organ systems in the following weeks. In the following week, I think. So it might just be 1 or 2 weeks. I can't remember. Where we'll talk about the immune system, the reproductive system, the gastrointestinal system, all that kind of fun stuff. And so this is kind of the nice like introduction, if you will, to the rest of the unit. So if any of these lectures that you pay attention to this week, this is probably the one. Because it's going to give you a lot of terminology and things that are going to come back up pretty quickly. All right. So let's kind of dig in here. So animal form and function are intertwined. The study of the structure of an animal body is called anatomy, and physiology considers the function of those body parts. So, you know, we might study the anatomy of a brain, so that how the brain is structured, but how the brain is actually functioning is called physiology. And oftentimes you see these lumped together in courses in class in college. So you have anatomy and physiology usually together. Um, and I know at least at UCF we have specialized classes for anatomy and physiology for just humans, classes that focus primarily just on vertebrates, as well as we even have some that kind of focus on invertebrates, which have their own very different set of anatomy and physiology. So it is really important to remember these things. Physiology and anatomy, make sure you understand those definitions because they may or may not be a test question. So animal bodies have an organizational hierarchy. So an organ system, such as the human digestive system shown here, can only function properly if the organs, tissues, and cells that make it up are functioning properly. So you start with a cell, those form tissues, which form organs, which ultimately contribute to an organ system. Now, tissues often are divided up into multiple different types. So you might have epithelial or connective or muscle or nervous. And all of those things interact together to create those organs together. So it is really important to understand all these differences, and we'll get more into that here in a second. So specialized cells build up at the tissues. All animals are made up of multiple cell types, where you have true body tissues are found in all animals besides sponges, porifera, which they're their own separate thing. They're like the basal group of animals. And so as such, they have very, very weird anatomy compared to pretty much everything else that you're going to see. Now, all these different groups of cells interact and organize into tissues. This epithelial tissue creates a barrier lining, for instance, lining the surfaces of the organs, and in the stomach, epithelial tissues might be secreting digestive enzymes. And contractions of the muscle tissue mechanically break down food in the stomach, while digestive enzymes secreted by the epithelial tissue break down the food chemically. So in other words, you've got the epithelial cells producing those chemicals that are going to help break down food, and you've got the contractions of the stomach that are being powered by muscle tissue, and all of that's contributing into the organs themselves. And once you have two or more organs physically or functionally interacting and working together, these form what we call organ systems. So the digestive system in this case includes things like the salivary glands. So those are the glands that produce saliva in the back of your throat that are going to help mechanically break down food by the fact that it's going to help your mechanical processes of breaking down food by producing extra saliva that'll help facilitate like the chemical reactions needed to break down food mechanically. You've got the stomach, where primarily a lot of the chemical breaking down of food is going to occur. Intestines, where you're going to have the removal of the nutrients that you actually need from that food. Rectum, pancreas, liver, and gallbladder, which all have various different functions that are all kind of working together in harmony to ultimately get you to the point that you're taking a piece of food, you're processing it, and you're getting rid of whatever you don't need. So without all of these things working cohesively together, that would not be possible. So animal bodies can vary in form and function, but they carry out very similar functions usually. So animals ranging from annelids to vertebrates have organs that can sense the environment, acquire food, exchange gases, and eliminate waste, protecting themselves from injury and disease and reproduce. And oftentimes you can have very similar functions being done by very, very different sets of structures. So say, for instance, in mammals, we have three bones in our inner ear called the malleus, incus, and stapes that help to mechanically move sound from your eardrum to the actual auditory nerve. Now, in other species, those bones are still present in the jaw. So even though they're still there, they have very different functions. So in like reptiles and amphibians are being used primarily for mechanical mechanical breaking down of food, and humans and other mammals, we use that for being able to hear better. And while they still kind of have that purpose to some extent, because a lot of hearing in reptiles is based off of feeling vibrations in the lower jaw, or at least infrahearing, where you're getting those low vibration kind of sounds. Ultimately, my point here is that you have bones that are present in two different groups of organisms that are functionally very different, but ultimately they're present in both organisms. So it's still it's just neat how all these different things can be, repackaged and reused. Like the flipper of a dolphin and the hand of a bat. Cammy, sorry about that, y'all. Are very similar in structure, but their functions are totally different. So all these things are really cool when combined together. All right, so let's get to our first review question. Which of the following represents the correct order of the organization of an animal's body? A, cells, organs, organ systems, tissue. B, cells, tissues, organ systems. C, cells, tissue, organ systems, organs. Or D, tissue, cells, organs, organ systems. Now, obviously, this one was really straightforward, and it's clearly B. You're going to go from cell, tissue, to organ systems. So animals primarily consist of 4 tissue types. And all of these animal tissues consist of cells embedded in an extracellular matrix, a supportive network of proteins and carbohydrates secreted by the cells so that they can all connect and work together. And tissues fall into 4 broad categories: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Now, epithelia are single or multiple layers of flattened cube-shaped or columnar cells, and they cover interior and exterior surfaces of organs. They protect those organs and may be involved in secretion and absorption. Then you have connective tissue, which is cells scattered in a prominent extracellular matrix. These are for support, adhesion, insulation, attachment, and transportation. So in other words, a lot of the movement and protecting and keeping your body warm, that kind of stuff. Then you're going to get to muscle tissue, which is elongated cells that contract when stimulated, which is primarily for movement. So where connective is going to be kind of allowing for that movement to happen, muscle is going to be the actual process of moving you in some way, shape, or form. And finally, nervous tissues, which are cells that transmit electrochemical impulses and are designed for rapid communication among cells. Now, the epithelial tissue covers most of your body surfaces, and particularly they're tightly packed cells that coat the body's internal and external surfaces and are commonly found in things such as skin, mucous membranes, so those are going to be on the inside of your mouth, the inside of your intestines, those kind of things, as well as the lining of the digestive tract and the lungs. You can have and they're kind of different types too. You have the simple squamous, the simple cuboidal, the simple columnar, and the stratified squamous. Each one is kind of designed for different things. Epithelial tissues also form glands. Now, glands are secretory organs that produce and release substances into the blood or into ducts. Examples of this include mammary glands, which are present in breasts as well as in a lot of other weird places in the rest of mammals, including like under the arms and a lot of interesting places. Sweat glands, which are really, really useful for keeping our bodies cool and being able to maintain homeostasis, as well as salivary glands that are going to be useful for helping to break down food mechanically. Now, epithelial tissues usually have 2 sides. Each epithelial tissue has a free exposed side, and the opposite side is anchored to a layer of extracellular matrix called the basement membrane. So you can see that actual basement membrane here, and here's that free exposed side, and there's the cells there itself. Now, this basement membrane connects the epithelial tissue to the underlying connective or muscle tissue. In other words, that's what's going to allow it to form into all the organs that we think of. Now, simple epithelial tissue consists of 1 or more layers of cells, and I am totally misspeaking today. Simple epithelial tissue consists of one layer of cells, whereas stratified epithelial tissue has multiple cell layers. So simple is just a single one, stratified is multiple. So strata, think about like strata in a rock. You're going to have multiple layers built on top of each other. So by that definition, simple squamous epithelial tissue cells is a single layer of flattened cells. That's what that squamous is coming from. That allows substances to pass by diffusion and osmosis. And these types of tissues are primarily found in the linings of blood vessels in the alveoli of lungs. So they're really thin and they're primarily used for very specific kinds of circumstances because of the fact that they are so thin. It's also why your lungs are so vulnerable to infection. And that's something that we've obviously kind of talked about with COVID a little bit, but because it's a rather thin lining, it requires a lot of extra protection before you ever get to that point. Now, cuboidal cells are a little bit different, where they're a single layer of cube-shaped cells that help to secrete and absorb substances. These are going to be the tissues that you're going to primarily find at glands, as well as the lining of the kidney tubules. Then you get to the columnar cells, which is the epithelial tissue that is in layer of column-shaped cells that secrete and also secrete and absorb substances, just kind of like the cuboidal cells that we're talking about. Now, these tissues are going to be found in the lining of the digestive tract, the bronchi of the lungs, and the uterine tubes. So they're a little bit thicker and they have a little bit more structure there that's going to help produce and be a little bit more safe to be able to interact with. And then finally, you get to the stratified squamous, which are, remember, the squamous are the thin layer of flat cells. Here you have multiple thin layers of flat cells. And these are going to be layers of flattened cells that protect areas subject to abrasion. In other words, your skin. And it's going to primarily make up that outer layer of your skin. Then we're going to get back into connective tissue, which has several functions. So connective tissues fill the spaces in the body and protect the organs and provide structural support. So you can have loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, and adipose tissue. So adipose tissue is going to be primarily found in things like bone. Cartilage is going to be more of your dense connective tissue, and then loose connective tissue is going to be all your blood cells, that kind of stuff. Now, all these connective tissues can vary dramatically in structure, like we've kind of mentioned already, where you have blood cells versus cartilage cells versus bone cells. And connective tissues, again, are scattered throughout that extracellular matrix in various parts of the body. Specifically, that loose connective tissue holds organs in place and attaches epithelial tissues to other tissues. It's found primarily underneath the skin and between organs. You have dense connective tissue, which consists of cells in a dense matrix of protein fibers, and it connects muscles to bone and bone to bone, which is tendons and ligaments. Then you get to the adipose tissue, which is all the weird kind of one-off stuff. Now, adipose tissue is fat cells in a minimal extracellular matrix, and it stores fat energy and insulation. So they're beneath the skin, between the muscles, around the heart joints, and around the muscles. So ignore what I said. Apparently, this diagram is kind of misleading. Ultimately, what you need to know is those last 3 slides. So blood connective tissue is for transport. Blood consists of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and a liquid matrix, and it transports gases, hormones, weights, and nutrients around the body. And blood is found primarily inside of blood vessels. Who would have thought? You get cartilage, which cartilage connective tissue supports the body, and it consists of cells in a matrix of fine collagen fibers, and it provides flexible support in ears, joints, bone ends, and respiratory tracts. And finally, you get the bone connective tissue, which supports the body itself. And the bone consists of cells in a matrix of collagen, minerals. Mineralization makes the bone very solid. So in other words, it's really dense and has a ton of minerals that keeps it from being able to break easily. This is what's going to provide that firm support you need in the skeleton. Doesn't mean it still can't be broken. All right, so now we're going to get into muscle cells, which have 3 different types. Now, muscle tissue consists of cells that contract when electrically stimulated. The proteins that mediate the muscle cell contractions are called actin and myosin. Now, muscle cells have many mitochondria, so they can produce lots of ATP to power muscle contractions. We have generally three different types. You have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. So because these muscle tissues provide movement, these tissues appear striped or striated because the protein filaments in the cells are arranged into patterns, which are going to allow for that movement to occur. And muscle tissues attached to bones, or attached to soft tissues or bones, when the muscle cell contracts, the muscle or the body part moves itself. So the skeletal tissue moves the bones. So the skeletal muscles consist of elongated cells with many nuclei. As attached to the bones, it produces movement under voluntary conscious control. Although not always voluntary, though. It just kind of depends. Cardiac muscles are striated and consist of short branch cells, each with one nucleus. It makes up the walls of the heart and contracts the heart chambers under involuntary control. And finally, smooth muscle tissue helps the organs push substances through the body. So the smooth muscle consists of spindle-shaped muscle cells, each with one nucleus, and it produces slow involuntary movements in the digestive tract and arteries. Now finally, for our last tissue type, nervous tissue. This is going to be the type that transmits information. Nervous tissues use electrical signals to rapidly transmit information within an animal's body. So nervous tissue is composed of cells called neurons, which forms communication networks, neuroglia, which supports neurons. So you can have the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves, which are kind of your classic examples of these things. All right, so time for another quick review question. Bone is best described as blank kind of tissue. A, cuboidal, B, striated, C, connective, D, myelinated, or E, adipose. And now obviously the clear and correct answer is C, connective, because bones are a connective type of tissue. All right. Now before we kind of get into organ systems, I really wanted to kind of talk about this because I thought it was kind of neat. Snake venom is very specialized, right? So each different kind of snake venom can be kind of a cocktail of a couple different types of toxins. You have cytotoxin, which is just generally designed to kill cells. You have hemotoxin, which is designed to kill the connective tissue that is your blood. And then you have neurotoxin, which is designed to kill nervous cells and stop them from firing. Now, each one of these interacts a little differently, but I just find it really fascinating that within the chemical cocktail that is venom, you often have multiple or just a single component of one of these different kinds of toxins, neuro, hemo, or cyto, that are specially designed to attack a particular tissue group and shut it down or destroy it, which allows them to kill and eat their prey, or unfortunately defend themselves when dumb, drunk 20-year-olds try to catch them, which happens quite a lot, unfortunately. So in other words, don't pick up the snake. It's my ultimate takeaway from that message. But it is really cool that you can see these very specialized designed toxins that are designed to kill and paralyze prey that are present in snakes that are clearly designed to focus on each one of these tissue systems. And it's not like snakes are sitting in a lab, designing their venom. It's just interesting how evolution has allowed for that to happen. Anyways, so organ systems are interconnected. And obviously, organs are all arranged into organ systems that can have interconnected structures and functions. For instance, the nervous and endocrine systems coordinate communication. The nervous system specializes in rapid electrical communication, so they're going to be the ones primarily responsible for telling your muscles to move in a particular way or telling your heart to continue to beat, that sort of thing. Whereas the endocrine system is going to produce and secrete hormones, which are used for chemical communication. So these are going to be your much more long-term communications. So that's going to drive things like puberty and all that kind of fun stuff. So your nervous system is primarily focused on detecting, interpreting, and responding to stimulus from the outside and within the body, whereas your endocrine system is primarily responsible for producing hormones and works with the nervous system to control many body functions. So in other words, one is much more short-term, the other one's much more long-term. And the skeletal and muscular system support and move the body around. So you have the skeletal system, which consists of bones, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments. And each skeletal muscle is attached to a bone, which is then moved as the muscle contracts. So you have the skeleton, or the skeletal system, which provides a framework for the muscles to attach to and making movement possible. In other words, it's going to allow for all those strength points. So that way the muscle isn't just moving around floppy body tissue. It actually has a strong structural support to be able to move much larger things, which is why humans can get as big as we are compared to something like, say, a starfish or something like that. Because ultimately, as you increase in size, your body to surface area ratio changes rather dramatically. So the more surface area you have, it just gets really complicated, and we'll try to dig into that a little bit when we get into ecology, but ultimately that's how it functions. And when that ratio changes, it's going to dictate how big something can get. For instance, an elephant's probably about as big as it's going to get, just because there's only so much more it can do evolutionarily to increase its ability to sustain much more weight. So kind of neat. And then finally, you get the muscular system, which is going to support posture and enables the body to actually move. So in other words, they're going to attach to all those bones and actually move those bones around. These systems all work together to acquire energy. So producing enough ATP for cells in the body to function requires the digestive system, the circulatory system, and the respiratory system all to be working in harmony. For instance, the digestive system is going to break down nutrients into the chemical components. The circulatory system is going to be moving those chemical components around the body using the blood itself and carrying all those chemicals through the blood vessels. And then you get the respiratory system, which is going to deliver oxygen to the blood and remove carbon dioxide, which is going to ultimately facilitate respiration. Because while we think of respiration often as just something that's occurring in the lungs, because that's why we call it the respiratory system, respiration is occurring in all of our cells, and the only way that's possible is by blood moving oxygen and carbon dioxide around in our body, and then the lungs pulling that carbon dioxide out and sending it out of our body, and then pulling oxygen in when it's releasing that carbon dioxide. For kind of going back through this a little bit, the digestive system provides stored chemical energy. So food is broken down so that the potential energy in the chemical bonds can be extracted in cellular respiration. So in other words, it's providing the energy that cellular respiration, or the chemical bonds that cellular respiration needs to be able to pull apart and be able to actually gain ATP. The circulatory system transports all these substances. The heart pumps blood, carrying molecules including hormones, glucose, oxygen to all the cells in the body. And finally, the respiratory system exchanges all those gases in and out of the body. This is how our cells are able to keep steady supply of oxygen, which is needed for cellular respiration, as well as remove carbon dioxide, which can be toxic at high levels and actually cause our blood to get too acidic. These systems all have to work together to protect the body. The urinary, integumentary, and immune and lymphatic systems eliminate toxic substances and infectious microorganisms that could potentially harm the body. You also have the reproductive system, which produces the next generation. Ultimately, we can't continue to exist without being able to reproduce, right? So the reproductive system is what relies on hormones from the nervous and the endocrine system to produce gametes. Females will carry the offspring in a uterus, which is made of muscle or nervous tissue. And keep in mind, this is just females from a biological perspective, not from a gender perspective, so that kind of complicates everything. But for this purposes, we're going to strictly be talking about the scientific biological definition of sex, and we're going to kind of keep it more broad and talk more about animals and humans. So, but generally speaking, females tend to primarily carry offspring in the uterus, which is made up of muscle, nervous tissue, and epithelium. And it's able to function only with the help of the circulatory systems and the excretory systems. All right, review question 3. If your kidneys failed to function, what would you expect to happen in your body? A, you would not be able to remove nitrogenous waste from your body. B, you'd have too many infections. C, you'd have trouble getting excess CO2 out of your body. Or D, you would not be able to produce hormones when they are needed. All right, so let's go through all the possible answers here. B, you would have too many infections. So kidneys are a part of the excretory system, which is not involved in immune defense primarily. So in this case, B is not a correct answer. C, you would have trouble getting rid of excess CO2 out of the body. That's handled primarily by the respiratory system, so we can go ahead and remove that one as well. D, you would not be able to produce the hormones when they are needed. While the kidney does have some closely related glands that are related to hormone production, those are still technically part of the endocrine system. So technically, the correct answer is A, you'd not be able to remove nitrogenous waste from your blood. Your kidneys are designed in a very specialized structured way to be able to remove nitrogenous waste from your blood and then ultimately pass them out as urine from your body. So of course, the answer is A. Kind of thinking back to cells for a minute, remember that homeostasis is a state of internal constancy. So animal bodies have to, not only do cells have to maintain homeostasis, but the entire body of an animal has to maintain homeostasis. So animal bodies maintain various forms of homeostasis, including stable temperature, blood pressure, and fluid composition. And if any one of these gets too far out of whack, it can ultimately cause the entire body to fail. So organ systems interactions promote homeostasis. So organ systems work together to maintain the composition of fluids surrounding the body's cells. For example, the circulatory system exchanges substances with other organ systems to regulate constant glucose, salt, and pH levels in the blood. In other words, if it wasn't pulling in these substances, it wouldn't be able to maintain the ideal perfect conditions that it needs in the blood to be able to transport things around. Particularly, this is something we have to think about when it comes to blood pH, which can often be radically influenced by an increase in carbon dioxide, which when it gets into the bloodstream becomes carbonic acid, which sounds really extreme, but to be honest, carbonic acid isn't that bad. It does release some excess H plus ions, which can increase the or decrease the pH of a blood, which can cause problems. Now, when one of these is just slightly out of whack, say for instance your kidneys stop working, then you're not able to remove all those nitrogenous wastes quickly, and it can actually cause your body to not be able to properly expel all the fluids it needs to, which ultimately results in you being able to, just that little bit of, and this can happen over a course of a day. If your kidneys stop working, you can totally build up enough fluid in your body over the course of a week to kill you. It's kind of scary to watch. As somebody who has a close family member going through dialysis, they miss dialysis for a couple days and it's bad. And they end up in the hospital with fluid on the lungs and all that kind of stuff. So just these little tiny changes can completely wreck the entire system. Now, homeostasis is primarily maintained through negative feedback loops, in which think of it as almost like a thermostat for the human or animal bodies in general, and that a heater maintaining a comfortable room temperature. So in other words, when it gets too warm, you go down to your thermostat and you turn it down a little bit. This tells the air conditioning, in our case, the heater in their case, is to turn on and the room cools, right? And then if it gets too cold, we can go back to the thermostat, turn it up a little bit, the air conditioning turns off, and then it stops. So basically, ultimately what's happening is in a negative feedback loop, you're shutting things down, whereas a positive feedback loop, you're actually increasing the rate of something. So in this system, a sensor detects the changes in the environment response. So in our example, the thermostat is that sensor. It detects the changes in optimal temperature and it responds by signaling to the heater, or the heater will counteract the change that was detected. So this is the effector that we're referring to. So heater in this case is the effector, or the air conditioning in our case, because we live in Florida. It's better to talk about air conditioning than it is to talk about heaters. So when a room is too warm, the thermostat signals the heater to turn off. When the room cools, when the room is too cold, the thermostat signals the heater to turn on and the room warms, or vice versa with air conditioning. Now, control centers in the brain and in other places throughout the body can coordinate these negative feedback loops. The control centers are structures that receive input from a sensor and send signals to one or more effectors. And the main control center for animals is in part of the brain that we call the hypothalamus. That's going to regulate pretty much all of your body functions. And this is primarily not done through conscious thought. It's done through subconscious and basically always happening in the background while you're sitting here thinking about this lecture. Your body is, through your hypothalamus, maintaining all of your body conditions as needed. And the hypothalamus is ultimately part of many negative feedback loops. So the hypothalamus will respond to sensors in multiple organ systems and is able to regulate organs in each system in order to counteract the environmental change. So say, for instance, you're looking at all these different systems here. The hypothalamus is going to tell, say if there's not enough, if this is actually, I think in this example, you've got too much carbon dioxide in the blood, right? So what's happening is you've got too little air and not enough carbon dioxide. And it's been getting that from some sort of stimulus in the blood system and saying, hey, there's too many H+ ions present in the circulatory system. And so that's going to help you do some very interesting things. And there's plenty other examples like this too. For instance, the hypothalamus is going to coordinate homeostasis of multiple organs by stimulator faster breathing when O2 is low. So if you've got a low amount of oxygen in your body, it's going to tell you, hey, you need to breathe more. And again, this is all subconscious. It's not like you're having to tell your body, oh, you need to breathe more. So I'm going to sit here and go and have to think about it. It's going to automatically do that in the back of your head. It's also going to regulate the release or the conservation of body heat. So if you're too cold, you're going to try to conserve more body heat by, getting goosebumps or having the little shivers, which are muscle contractions to generate heat. It could raise or lower your blood pressure by controlling the cardiac muscle contractions. So in other words, it's going to help either increase or decrease based off of what it needs to do. Or when things like the body salt concentration changes, it signals the kidneys to release or conserve salt. In other words, if you're burning through all of your salt concentrations through sweating, it's going to tell your kidneys to save as much as it possibly can. And so it's not going to, when you urinate the next time, it's not going to have as much salt in it. Now, unlike negative feedback loops, positive feedback loops amplify changes rather than counteracting them. So for instance, blood clotting is an example of a positive feedback, in which once started, it perpetuates into its own activity. So in other words, by itself, positive feedback therefore does not maintain homeostasis. Ultimately, however, other controls cut off the positive feedback loop and restore equilibrium. So for instance, if you're punctured, say in this case by shaving, you're going to be losing blood cells out of your body, which is obviously not ideal. So what happens is all these platelets bind together, and the more that bind together, the more likely they are to clot. And then ultimately, once they've closed the holes in the vessel itself, it reopens to allow blood cells to move through again. Now that reopening of the blood cells or blood vessels is primarily done through a negative control loop or negative feedback loop, whereas positive feedback is what's driving all the clotting in the first place. All right, so let's move into question, I think 4 at this point. If blood pH is controlled by negative feedback, when your blood becomes too acidic, you should A, crave sour beverages, B, your kidneys should remove H+ ions from your blood, C, your rate of digestion should slow, D, your heart rate should increase, or E, your appetite should increase. And in this case, the pretty obvious answer is B, your kidneys should remove H+ ions from the blood. And the reason why that is because in this negative feedback loop, because you have your blood pH is too hot or too low, it needs to remove those H plus ions from the blood, and that's primarily going to happen at the kidneys. So in this case, you should crave sour beverages. That's going to actually cause an increase in pH, or sorry, a decrease in pH or increase in acidity, however you want to put it. The rate of your digestion should slow. That's not going to really help anything. Your heart rate should increase. That's not going to really help anything in this case. Or your appetite should increase. That's not going to really help anything in this case. So the only thing that sort of makes sense is B. Now, animals will regulate their body temperature. This is called thermoregulation, or in other words, the control of your body temperature. And it kind of depends on what kind of organism you're talking about to how this is going to happen. So in snakes, they're what we call ectotherms. If you've heard the terms warm-blooded and cold-blooded, I actually really hate those terms because it often leads to not demonetization, to negative views of anything that's considered quote-unquote cold-blooded because it sounds like it's evil and nasty and mean. No, it just means that they maintain their body temperature very differently, and it changes how they can grow and maintain their lives, which is kind of cool. So the snake is ectothermic. It relies on external conditions to thermoregulate, and thus has to alter its behavior in order to respond to the environment. Whereas a bird is endothermic, which means it generates its body heat and regulates its temperature internally. So in other words, snakes, turtles, all that kind of fun stuff are going to have to do basking behavior, where they're going to go out and seek higher temperature areas to warm their body up to be able to do things like digest food and all that kind of fun stuff. Or when they're too hot, they're going to move into the shade and hide so that way they can, cool their bodies down. Whereas birds and mammals primarily do all of that stuff through internal maintenance, through having a higher, what's the word for it? They're going to maintain a higher metabolism, which is going to allow them to maintain those higher temperatures constantly without having to use behavioral changes to maintain their body's temperature. Now, extreme temperatures can alter biological molecules. So some forms of thermoregulation is necessary in order for protein and membrane structure to remain intact. And overall, if a cell becomes too warm or too cool, enzymes function less efficiently and vital chemical reactions slow down or even stop. So in other words, you have to find a way to maintain that homeostasis or things aren't going to work. Now, endotherms actually use a negative feedback for thermoregulation, where the bodies of an endothermic animal are equipped with multiple sensors and the effectors of maintaining body temperature. And the hypothalamus is the control center that initiates responses to warm or cold to cool the body. This is, accomplished through things like sweating, dilating your blood vessels, or when you're too cold, constricting your blood vessels, shivering, voluntary changes in behavior, which can help a little bit too. Now, ectotherms, because they don't require as much or don't have that higher metabolism that you find in endotherms, require less food and energy for thermoregulation and ultimately require less food in general. That's why a snake can go weeks on end without eating, but mammals pretty much have to eat every 3 to 4 days to really be able to maintain and be comfortable. Ultimately, if humans don't eat for 30 days, you're going to die. There's what we call the 3 rule. You can survive without oxygen for 3 minutes, you can survive without water for 3 days, and you can survive without food for 30 days. And it's a rough approximation. You can probably get past that, especially if you have a lot of extra fat like I do, beyond that point. But it all just kind of depends. But still, ectotherms, because they're not maintaining that high metabolism to be able to keep their body temperature at a specific way, are able to avoid some of those constant or constant energy sinks. Now, most animals are ectotherms, including pretty much all invertebrates. Most fish, there are some fish that are quote-unquote warm-blooded. All amphibians and non-avian reptiles. But even then, some non-avian reptiles are borderline because things like leatherback sea turtles and some of those kinds of things have to live in very cold environments, so they almost have to have a higher metabolism. It's not quite being an endotherm, but it's pretty close. And because of this, they've evolved a multitude of behaviors for conserving body heat, as well as the ability to seek out or escape environmental heat, just depending on the situation. So it's really cool information, and there's some really cool studies out there where they look at how genes can help to better facilitate these things too. But it's still really fascinating. All right. So that's kind of it for our brief introduction into tissues and organ systems and stuff. Starting next week, we're going to actually dig into the specific organ systems a lot more in depth. So look forward to that. Now, as always, final reminder that your quiz 4 is due on Sunday, September 20th. Hopefully, you all have been watching these lectures and studying alongside of them. You should be spending about 3 hours for each lecture, an hour in person or an hour watching the lecture or so, and 2 hours on the back end studying this material. That's the only way you're going to remember this stuff. And yes, I know it might just seem like memorization, but a lot of this stuff is really important to understand because it's going to help you understand not only your body better, understand how the world works around you better. And ultimately, I'm not testing you on how to read a book. I'm testing you on how to understand this material. So yes, the quizzes are open note, but the exams are not for that reason. Anyways, as always, y'all, if you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. I am always happy to answer things. Just please reach out. And as always, again, my same stupid, diatribe I go on every single video at the beginning, at the end. Wear your masks, socially distance. Because I don't know about y'all, but I like having campus the way it is right now. And I'd like it to go back to normal so that way you guys can actually enjoy clubs in person, being in class with your other classmates, because I know being online this semester sucks for a lot of you. Trust me, I would much rather be giving these lectures in person. Yeah, it has some benefits, this whole asynchronous thing, but it's just more fun to be able to interact with y'all and ask you questions and all that kind of fun stuff. So anyways, I will see y'all next week. I hope you'll have a great rest of the week and hope you have a great weekend, and I will see y'all real soon.